Good morning and welcome to the RAS Safety School Series. I'm Danielle Skillman and I'm the Director of Corporate Training here at RAS. I will be moderating today's session and we are excited to have Lori Berdahl with us today. Before I turn it over to Lori, I want to take a moment to share some general housekeeping information. Everyone is muted on the call today. We'll be taking questions during today's presentation. You can enter your question at any time, and we will be addressing those questions at the end of the presentation. Please use the chat option at the bottom of your screen. Scrolling over your mouse over the bottom of your screen should cause that chat to pop up. We know that your time is precious, and we have a lot of great information to share with you, so let's get started. Today's presentation, Get Smart, Don't Let Safety Slip, is focused on slip, trip, fall prevention specific to our school district partners and is presented by RAS School Specialist Lori Berdahl. Lori is a licensed occupational therapist, and her initial 15 years as an occupational therapist were primarily served in an outpatient rehabilitation setting, treating injured workers and assisting them in their return to work. In 2005, she joined RAS in her present position of ergonomics and loss control specialist. This move shifted her focus from rehabilitation to prevention of workplace injuries. School district safety is currently her primary focus area for RAS. Lori, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Danielle. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining what we hope will be just the first of many school district-focused webinars. For today, I plan to review slip, trip, fall trends, explore some causes, and discuss 10 best practices for prevention. These 10 best practices were compiled from many different sources, including NIOSH, OSHA, their walking and working surfaces information, and the National Floor Safety Institute, and also several research articles and books. So our new RAS data management system allowed me to take a look at all the claims submitted by our insured school districts over the past 10 years. And when I looked at those claims, slip, trip, fall was the second highest cause of workplace injury for school districts, just behind struck by claims. It was the highest cause of lost work time, and it was the most expensive injury category. And in fact, it's more expensive than the combination of the costs for strains, motor vehicle accidents, cuts, and burns combined. And that is all just looking at school district statistics for educational services insured for RAS. So, and I think that falls are so expensive because they tend to involve multiple body parts and result in more severe injuries like fractures, expensive fractures, and concussions. So, of course, public entities like grocery stores and restaurants, retail, and schools need to also be concerned about the liability costs from slips, trips, and falls, as well as the work comp costs. And the National Floor Safety Institute says that $50,000 is the average cost to defend against a slip, trip, and fall lawsuit, and that $100,000 is the average judgment awarded in those cases that end up going to trial. So I'm going to be focusing mostly on work comp related concerns today at during the webinar, but I'll also be throwing in things that are liability based as well, because I know that that's definitely a concern for public entities. So in their research, the National Floor Safety Institute determined that about 55% of slips, trips, and falls are the result of hazards from walking surfaces, and 24% are the result of either inadequate or dangerous footwear. 10% is due to warnings that weren't, or hazards rather, that weren't specifically outlined, that the hazard warning wasn't adequate for the hazardous condition. 8% was inadequate training to negotiate hazardous areas or conditions. And then 3% were determined to be fraudulent claims, submitted by folks perhaps hoping for a nice payout or some time off from work. One additional cause that I don't want to ignore is our cultural plague of busyness. Checking email at work isn't good enough anymore. Now we need to check our email while we're walking into work, and checking other things on our phones also is very tempting as we're walking around. So this cultural busyness makes it even more critical that as safety folks, we try to eliminate the hazards for people that might just not be paying attention to their own walkway and their own path. Aging is another factor worth mentioning. This is a Bureau of Labor Statistics graph, and the yellow line down here represents the U.S. labor force ages 55 plus. And this age group has been on a steady rise since about 2005. And it is projected to make up, this age group of over 55 is projected to make up 25% of our workforce by the end of 2020. And it looks like it's going to kind of continue to rise above that, whereas the other categories of the 16 to 24-year-olds and the mass bulk of the 25 to 54-year-olds are dropping down a little bit, and this age group continuing to rise. So what happens with aging, and why is that an issue for slips, trips, and falls? As we age, unfortunately, our strength and muscle mass decreases. Our strength tends to peak at about age 30. Our reaction time and speed decreases, and so does our flexibility. And the problem with that is that our range of motion is limited, and the tighter muscles that we have makes it more likely that we're going to have an injury risk, even from something like just slipping across the surface. Even if we don't fully fall, we might slip a little bit, and just that action of trying to catch ourselves as we fall, inflexible, tight muscles can result in strain injuries. So circulatory problems start to appear, which increases the likelihood of fatigue, making us more tired, impacting our balance. Visual acuity decreases, so our vision worsens, making it more difficult for us to negotiate changes in depth, glare, and busy patterns, like on these stairs. This is a set of stairs in a very public spot in Sioux Falls where lots of people walk, and so it's definitely a hazard that's been created, especially for older folks. So balance skills tend to diminish as we age. A large study done by the Johns Hopkins University of Medicine determined that about 35% of folks over the age of 40 suffer from some kind of vestibular dysfunction. And I think it's important to just quickly mention that balance can also be impacted by other things, such as medications that folks are on, and also obesity. The studies on obesity have kind of varied, so I didn't include a whole slide of information on that, but their obesity certainly can affect the coefficient of friction that someone needs between themselves and the floor. It also changes a person's center of gravity, maybe making them a bit more off balance. So that's another a cultural consideration for us. But back to aging, just the fatigue, the slowed reaction time, and the balance or vision limitations definitely increase the risk of falls for folks. So now that I have entirely depressed us all, let's turn our attention to prevention. Prevention best practice number one for slips, trips, and falls is just teamwork. It's just a good idea to assemble a group of people at your district who can take ownership over the safety conditions throughout all of your different facilities. Some ideas are, of course, the safety director, the maintenance and operational services director, lead person, or at least some representation from that group of folks. The custodians who have custody over their building, getting custodial representation from the different buildings is a very good idea. Schools have a particular challenge just because of all of the different locations that they have to pay attention to. It's not like a large hospital system that has one facility to pay attention to exits and entrances. Schools just have that specific issue of having so many locations. So it's good to have a representative from maybe each of the larger locations. Also, food services and warehouse are other departments that tend to be high-risk departments, so it's good to have their contribution as well. And the primary duty of this group is just to oversee and manage the efforts of all the other best practices. Oversee those prevention efforts, make sure that things are getting taken care of in a timely manner, and that hazard assessments are being done and followed up on. It can be a good idea to meet quarterly at least, is what most of the recommendations I have read. At least that allows a team to talk about some of the hazards that occur at all 4 seasons of the year, because they tend to vary throughout the year. And those folks can be involved in construction projects and review injury trends and footwear policies and housekeeping procedures, and all of those things we will be talking about because they're all best practices. Our second best practice here is just to look back and look at what your specific unique trends have been at your district. Where have these injuries been happening at your district specifically? Do they happen inside? Do they happen outside? Are they happening at one school specifically versus another? One of the schools that we work with has one location that had very few slip, trips, and falls, and that's great information to know too. Those the folks that are doing slip fall prevention at that location have good information to pass along to all the other locations because they don't have a lot of injuries there. Looking at what time it happens. Is it a certain time of the day, a certain time of the year that incidents tend to happen at your district? And what are some common circumstances or reasons, and who tends to be involved? When I looked at all of our slip, trip, fall information for school districts here at RAS, teachers are, of course, by far the most frequent, but they are also the most frequent or the largest group of employees. So it can be helpful sometimes to look at the numbers in terms of percentages, but overall it's just important to know which employee groups are mostly at risk so that you can target those groups for prevention. But teachers definitely by far the most frequent, but also clerical staff, custodian, maintenance, food service, and food services are always around wet areas, and then bus drivers when they're doing their pre-bus inspections in the morning or in the afternoon. Even just walking to and from their buses in the bus yard tends to be treacherous and is an area where there's lots of slipping and falling. We've also had some bad injuries of just bus drivers getting tripped by backpacks and et cetera that's in the aisles of their bus, and those bus treads tend to get really slippery when they're wet, and they're almost always wet. So some common slip, trip, and falls that we have seen are, of course, the snow, slush, and ice on sidewalks and in parking lots, and playgrounds is another big one, frequent place that we see slips, trips, and falls happening. Wet floors, of course, inside. And then debris is always an issue at schools. Leaves are very slippery when they're inside on a linoleum or tile floor. If a teacher in not slip-resistant footwear steps on a leaf, they're going to be sliding across the tile floor, also with papers and pencils and food and that sort of thing. So that's been another common slip, trip, fall issue for the school districts that we insure. Tripping on items in hallways is always a problem, especially at the elementary schools, of course. And we see a lot of reports of slipping and tripping up and down stairs and also curbs outside. We've seen some of that, but definitely stairs as well, just carrying things in front, folks carrying things in front of them as they're walking up and down steps. Any kind of debris on the stairs that create a trip hazard that they don't notice, or the stairs themselves not having adequate tread. And then sadly, one of the ones that we see each fall typically, and again maybe around Christmas time, is teachers standing on tables, chairs, or desks while they're working on their bulletin boards or hanging holiday decorations and that sort of thing. Instead of standing on quality step stools or ladders, they tend to stand on some tables, chairs, and desks, and then unfortunately fall off of them. So the third best practice that your team can focus on is investigating incidents after they happen And it's just very helpful in gathering some detailed trend information for your own district. And it's good for the slip trip fall team members or supervisors to gather this information from the injured workers and maybe any witnesses. You can gather information about occurrences or even just near misses. And gathering the info as soon as possible after the occurrence is a good idea before the memories fade or the environmental conditions change. And RAS actually has a slip trip fall prevention incident investigation report that we're going to email out to all the participants of the webinar after the webinar is done. And it asks questions like, did you fall forward or backward? And what body part did you land on? Were you changing direction or turning a corner? Were you in a hurry? Were you carrying or pushing anything that blocked your view? Was your attention distracted? And if so, by what? So just ask some of those sorts of questions. It also asks questions about footwear and the conditions of the ground in the area and the incident site. So that's a possibility of something to use that at least you can add maybe some of those questions to your current form that you have if you don't want to, use a separate second form. So pictures might also be helpful. Russell Kendazor in his book Falls Aren't Funny, he talks about how date-stamped pictures can be helpful in liability-related claims, just to provide a judge with a literal snapshot of the conditions at the time of the incident and issue, or at least shortly after. It can help in liability related claims. It can help to show a school district's due diligence in taking those issues and incidents seriously. So our fourth best practice is hazard assessment and, of course, remediation. Hopefully remediating any problems before injuries occur. And there are many slip, trip, and fall environmental hazard assessment forms out there on the internet of variable length and specificity. But RAS has one as well that I'll also send out after this is done. But no, regardless of what hazard assessment form you use or which one you like to use, it's just a good idea to get out there a couple of times a year, at least a couple of times a year, so that you can do a formal walkthrough assessment during different seasons and check out what those hazards might be and notice them as they're occurring or before they're occurring. So some floor walkway condition issues might be uneven, damaged, or loose flooring or thresholds, chunks of tile missing the chunk creating a trip hazard itself, and the dips and changes in height creating a trip hazard. The National Floor Safety Institute says that anything that is greater than a quarter inch, any height difference greater than a quarter inch, creates a trip hazard. That at a quarter inch, people are more likely to catch their toe on that surface and trip forward. And a quarter inch just is not very high. It's not very big at all. The Americans with Disabilities Act says that anything over a half inch will limit access and mobility. So in this example, it's hard to see in the picture without actually having a measuring tape or ruler up against it. But this threshold in between a kitchen area and the inside of a walk-in refrigerator, that threshold difference was a half an inch. So of course, you don't have to worry about the ADA issues because the wheelchairs are likely not to be going in and out of this walk-in refrigerator, but carts certainly do roll over it, and that creates a bit of a strain issue that people have to push the carts a lot harder to get them over that lip and edge, and then certainly it creates a trip hazard for the workers that are going in and out, especially if they happen to not use a cart and they're just carrying something in front of them when they're walking. They might not see exactly where that threshold is and trip over it. So this particular location just put this hard plastic covering over the top to kind of bridge that gap a little bit, cover it up and make it a ramp almost so that the carts could roll more smoothly and people were less likely to trip. But you want to be looking for poorly lit areas, trip hazards, especially trip hazards in poorly lit areas, and no warning, bright warning color highlighting those hazards. Also, low-profile objects create trip hazards. We humans tend not to see things that are below about shin level, knee level to shin level. Anything lower than that, we tend not to really be looking for or seeing when we're walking down a path. So think, buckets, empty pallets, that the corner of the empty pallet is sticking out into a walkway in a warehouse. Any kind of wheels or equipment legs or platforms that are sticking out. In this example, this second can shelf is on wheels and has the wheel base protruding into the walkway. So, I mean, one possible solution is, getting a different can shelf, of course, but then also just moving this can shelf, the first one, out so that it's flush with the other one, so that eliminates this trip hazard that folks aren't going to see. They're just forced to walk around it. And then, and also putting attaching like a higher pole onto the edge of commonly used objects that are low might be a good way of putting something in the visual field of the folks that are in that area. So other things to look at, anti-fatigue and drainage mats are fantastic ideas, but often they can create trip hazards, because if they're all kittywampus, they end up sticking out into a walkway and people can catch their toe on it. So it's a good idea to make sure that the mats are of adequate size and shape for the area that they need to be in, so that they don't end up surfboarding around too much and creating trip hazards just by the edges. And this was a bag of garbage that was just left in a walkway. And again, this is a kitchen area where folks might be carrying stuff in front of them when they're walking, potentially. We always encourage kitchen folks to use carts. That eliminates that problem, but often they may have, one item or a pan of something that they're carrying. And so when you're carrying things in front of you, you aren't going to see your feet or the path. So you may not see this hazard before you hit it. And this is especially around a little corner area. So we just talked about those issues with the staff and encouraged them to not leave the garbage right there in that walkway, to find a different location for it or to take it out quicker. So other things to think about are just the coefficient of friction of your flooring surface. I just like to slide my foot along flooring and see how much my foot slides. And because I usually am wearing anti-slip shoes, it can be a good idea to even put down a little tiny bit of water and clean it up afterwards, but use a little bit of water to kind of see how much you might slip in those areas. Looking for presence of debris and moisture, which is everywhere in school districts, especially where the kiddos are coming in and out from recess. There's a lot of that area. And when we get down to our practicing prevention section, we'll talk a little bit about some more remediation ideas, but just even one idea is just a housekeeping rules or guidelines set up for some of those high traffic areas, like how a custodian at a district might need to deal with some of those situations right away. So every time there's kiddos, a big group of them coming in and out for recess, it needs to be kind of taken care of right away before the teacher, without the anti-slip footwear, comes down that hallway a few moments later and slips on the leaf or slides on the wet flooring. So looking for any kind of leaky soap dispensers. I know leaky water fountains are ongoing problem at school districts, and drains, plugging, liquids pooling, that sort of thing. Things to watch out for and to get onto a list for repair and maintenance and remediation. Now, entrance mats, floor mats can be a whole separate hazard assessment. Some schools will do a matting hazard assessment one time a year or a couple of times a year, and just go around and check out the adequacy of all of the entrance mats, and making sure that they're secure to the floor and that they don't surfboard around when you step on them. Make sure they're wide enough so that folks can't step around them. And then also making sure that they're long enough to remove the moisture and debris. And the mat recommendations tend to vary by source, at least from my research. But the general rule of thumb, according to the ANSI standards, is that you shouldn't have any moisture or debris left on your shoe when you take that last step off of the mat. But that's something that's super hard to measure if you're out looking at mats and trying to assess adequacy of those mats. So it's hard to be objective about that. So I included some measurements as well that are from a variety of sources, including the National Floor Safety Institute, that in dry conditions you want matting that's sufficient for 6 to 8 walking steps, about 12 to 16 feet, and then it increases from there. And that's a lot of length. I know some schools have had their kiddos stomp their feet when they come inside. So they'll do like a post-recess stomp, so that as the kids are entering the school and walking across the mats, they aren't just walking on the mats, they're stomping their feet while they're walking on the mats, so that it helps to get more stuff off of their feet, because especially in snowy conditions, it can be difficult to have 20 to 25 feet of matting kind of everywhere that you need it in the school. So stairs are definitely a hazardous area, and an area where we have seen a lot of serious injuries for teachers and clerical workers and other staff as they're going up and down. So you want to make sure that your step finish isn't too slippery. Make sure to check out the tread condition and check for uneven damaged steps or the front step nosing. If it's uneven or damaged, people might have a tendency to catch either a heel on it or a toe on it. If the steps aren't even or equal, then folks have a tendency also to trip, because we mentally think or plan for our steps to be even as we climb up and down. And of course, OSHA has their walking and working surfaces have many guidelines on handrails. So you want to make sure that those are of adequate height and length, and to make sure that they're secure to the wall when you're doing your hazard assessment checks. And we're back to this busy carpeting again, that either busy patterns, either tile or carpeting on steps. Make sure to check out that, and plan for some of those things in construction projects too. When you're putting down new flooring, make sure that it isn't too busy. Adequate lighting is really important in stairwells, and I've talked to many operational services folks, and I know that many schools have energy saving plans in place that might reduce the lighting at certain times of the day. And I just would say that stairwells are probably not the place to try to save on power. It's better to have more lighting in some of those areas. So yeah, and so other things to inspect: building perimeters, of course, crumbling concrete, thresholds with the 1/4 inch or higher height difference. In the Midwest, as all of us are in, we all are dealing with the snow, the freezing, the melting, the refreezing, which ends up with the heaving and the cracked concrete. So there's that is forever a battle to try to at least use the safety yellow paint to highlight the tripping hazards until you can get the opportunity to do the engineering changes by beveling areas or fixing heaved or concrete or tile. Of course, the snow melt and drainage near walkways is always a challenge for us in the Midwest too, making sure that checking these areas out. And if you're seeing hazards like this, it may not be something that can be immediately remediated, but getting it on a list for future budget remediation and re-engineering would be a great idea, to get different kinds of drainage if possible, because this area right in between a couple of cars is going to be a real treacherous spot. That tends to be I had read a while ago that tends to be the main spot that people slip and fall, is when they're getting in and out of their vehicle, because the no man's land in between cars tends to never see the sun, no matter the time of day, and so you end up getting the melt and refreeze, and even if it changes people's psychologically when it's a nice, warm, sunny day and they think that there's not any likelihood of ice around, but when they get out of their car, that area between cars maybe has not seen the light of day in a while. And so, yeah, so it's just real easy to be also off balance when you're getting in and out of the car and to run into some black ice. So making sure to check those areas in parking lots is a good idea. This was at a facility that had some kind of some poor drainage design. The drain is going to drain right across the sidewalk, so in a melt refreeze situation, it's going to create a lot of treacherous hazards for walking on the sidewalk. So what they did was rerouted this downspout into the landscaping so that it wasn't going right across the sidewalk, because for them they were thinking about tunneling under the sidewalk, but this area over here also doesn't have great drainage or a gutter, so or a sewer rather, so that area is where folks might be parking, and so the water would have ended up pooling over here if they had just tunneled under the sidewalk. So they ended up diverting it off to the side into landscaping instead. This is another situation at a building where employees are parking over here on this side of the picture, kind of out of the range of the picture. And there was a downspout coming out of the side of the building, which dumped the water right into next to this sidewalk where there's lots of foot traffic coming through. And so the hazard here is there isn't a good place that I could find anyway to divert the water to. So even just using warning cones or putting it on someone's list to put out some warning cones during some melt refreeze times might be your best bet, just to make sure that folks are aware of all of the ice that are in that area, and of course the salting and sanding as well. But noting any possible refreeze, melt runoff areas is important. Those next to sidewalks end up being dangerous. Creative landscaping can sometimes decrease unsafe cut-through areas. So if there's an area where teachers or kiddos tend to be walking, or maybe they shouldn't be walking, and they're getting on slippery grass and leaves, putting a bush in a creative location might help to stop that. So, and I'll be talking more about prevention ideas in a little bit, but first of all, best practice number 5 is to think about your footwear policies. Just take a look at what footwear policies you currently have in place and consider putting them in place for the higher risk groups. I don't know of any school districts, in all of them that I have visited and worked with, I don't know of any that have footwear policies in place for teachers, because it seems like that is an issue it ends up becoming a union issue and a uniform problem. But instead, folks who typically can get footwear policies, or most commonly have them, are food services, custodians, maintenance, building grounds, and warehouse workers. Those are kind of the best groups to be focusing on for putting a footwear policy in place. And the footwear policy can require the verbiage of anti-slip, non-slip, or slip resistant. Unfortunately, in the shoe industry, all of those terminology is kind of used interchangeably. So using all 3 of those in your policy may not be a bad idea. And saying that any one of those is, would be appropriate footwear. Things that definitely have the soft rubber sole with more deep treads and channels to wick that moisture away from the end and leave lots of little friction contact points between the human being and the ground, so that the sole of the shoe just helps keep people on their feet. And we do have a couple of examples of footwear policies that we have just in a Word document, so that the school district can personalize it, add what they want, take out what they don't want. So if you're interested in that, by all means, get in touch with me and I can email it to you. That maybe could be another thing I add to emailing out at the end of the webinar. Some of the verbiage in our footwear policy examples, one of them is just that the footwear is required whenever the employee is on company property, on company time, or when they're operating company equipment. And also some sort of statement about the failure to wear the required footwear might result in immediate disciplinary action up to and including termination of employment. And then actually enforcing the footwear policy is very important. If folks show up to work not in the right shoes, it's a good idea to write that up so that and put it in their HR file so that you have some documentation of enforcement. Because if you have the documentation somewhere, it could help to potentially deny a workers' comp claim if somebody doesn't wear the proper footwear and you have asked them to. But in order to do that, denying the employee the workers' comp benefits for not following the policy, although it is possible, it's kind of highly unlikely. It really only would be possible if the district had the policy in writing, the employee had signed the policy, it maybe had been reviewed annually, and there was some evidence in place that the policy had been enforced in the past, like writing somebody up. But it wouldn't have to be the same employee that had the accident or injury, but just having some kind of evidence that the policy is taken seriously and that people are written up for not wearing the proper footwear and it is enforced is important. But at least that provides some proof that the compliance is important. And then also having the statement in the policy that talks about, failure to wear the required footwear could negate rights of workers' compensation benefits should they be involved in an injury or incident where they're found in violation of the policy. So again, that's not always possible to deny a claim based on that, but I think just even having this statement in the policy causes people to pause, causes the employees to pause, and makes it more likely that they might make a smart footwear choice before coming to work instead of choosing slippery or more dangerous smooth bottom footwear. So, and if you do require specific footwear at work, providing a stipend is definitely the nice thing to do, but from what I understand, it's not absolutely necessary or required in every state. So you can check, your state individual union agreements and state HR rules on some of the uniforms. You may not have to provide a stipend. It might simply just be a requirement of the job, but you'd have to check into that for your area. So best practice number 6 is to evaluate what your current housekeeping procedures are. Take a look at what cleaners you are using and make sure that your cleaners aren't actually increasing slipperiness of the type of floors that you have. One of the school districts we work with had replaced the flooring in their dish room to this absolutely fabulous flooring that had increased friction surface on it, that it was kind of a rubberized surface almost, and it really helped with grip, except that the cleaner that they were using on it made it slippery. So they weren't getting the full benefit of the flooring because of the type of cleaning chemical they were using. So they ended up going back to the manufacturer and asked for recommendations. They said that they didn't feel like it was, slip resistant enough, and they got recommendations on a different flooring chemical to use, and it ended up making a big difference. And it's a great flooring for them in their dish room area where they have lots of foot traffic and lots of water. So cleaners, some cleaners have a National Floor Safety Institute certification on them, and just going to the National Floor Safety Institute website, there's lists of cleaners that are recommended there. And they've done some testing on the coefficient of friction for that product, both for cleaners and for actual flooring, types of flooring. So having food service folks make sure that they're using the proper degreasers in food prep and serving areas, and that they're changing their mop water often enough. It's not using greasy or dirty mops that spread spread grease or food products around. And like I was mentioning earlier, it's a good idea just to develop some housekeeping protocols and procedures for high-risk areas, like areas where kiddos are coming in and out for recess, or other high-risk areas might be warehouse entrances or food service areas, dish rooms, any place that tends to be wet in nature. When folks are stripping floors, we've had a number of injuries from custodian and maintenance folks over the summers when all of the floor stripping and sealing operations tend to be going on. And there are some products out on the market that help the folks that are doing that type of work and help protect them and keep them on their feet. This brand is Paws Stripping Shoes, and they have some footwear that is, and same with Grippers for Strippers. It's another brand. And both of them, it looks very similar to spaghetti. It's like red spaghetti that is rubber and attached to the bottom of the shoe or wound around on the bottom of the shoe. So it just creates lots of great little holes for some of the stripping material to flow through, and leaving you with the rubber spaghetti to stand on and keep you gripped and upright. So they're great products, and they come in just sizes like, small, medium, large, and extra large, so that you can, just by purchasing a variety of sizes, you don't have to have a specific size for each individual custodian. You can just kind of get a variety of sizes for different folks to save on the money expenditure, but they're great prevention. And other housekeeping procedures that people are likely already aware of, cleaning half the hallway at a time, even though many times at school districts you're doing the majority of your floor cleaning when kiddos tend to be not around, kind of later on in the day, but still there might be that teacher there working late or an activity going on that night. So cleaning half the hallway at a time and putting signs up on that half and leaving the other half open can be a good idea. Using floor machines that limit dry time, caution signs, of course, and educating staff on some sort of spill response is a great idea. So that leads us to number 7 of practicing prevention, just designating specific staff for that ongoing prevention. It seems that if you make safety is everybody's business, it eventually becomes safety is nobody's business. It's great. It's a great idea to make safety everybody's business. Don't get me wrong on that, but it's also good to have somebody directly responsible for the oversight, to be making sure that the walkways are safe and responding to that weather change. Have someone assigned that's going to add the extra mats that are necessary when the weather changes, or get out salt and sand before weather changes, post warning signs as needed, and respond to those spills and follow up on hazard assessments. So if mat edges are starting to get cracked or are lifting, you can extend mat life by securing the edges down to floors. The 3M has this nice stay-in-place tape that can be used on just one little edge or one little corner of a mat that maybe is cracked and lifting. Because those mats are so darn expensive, it's nice to be able to extend the life of those mats by using something like this just in that area. And the 3M, it's like the same kind of tape that's used on sticky notes, so it comes up and then can be reapplied on the floor and works a few times before it needs to be reapplied. And again, we'll be sending out this handout after the webinar, so you'll get these all these links and things will be included in that handout. So this is another floor grip mat, that tape that helps to hold mats in place on carpet. So if you're getting some bundling or bunching in a particular mat that has a fold in it or a crack or something, that can be good on a carpeted surface. Anti-slip tapes are great in areas where mats won't be effective. Also, there's non-slip epoxy, urethane, or acrylic surfaces out on the market that can be added on top of current flooring just to help increase the coefficient of friction on that floor. And many tapes and floor finishes have that National Sanitation Foundation approval or rating. You'll have to look for that for if you're going to use them in food environments, in the food areas. So cords are always a constant challenge. We have had a few over the years. We've had a few custodians who have gotten their feet wound up in the snake pit of cords, especially in the IT areas, and ended up falling. And one gal unfortunately broke her hip and ended up out for quite a while and had long-term disability issues just from getting wound up in that snake pit of cords and it tripping her and falling her and causing her to fall. So rerouting cords away from walkways is important. Bundling them, taping the braids together. There's lots of coils out on the market that can help put cords together in one big bundle because that makes it so much easier to see. It eliminates multiple trip hazard sources and increases the visibility of all of those cords. So if you have to run it through a traffic area, at least that bundles them all together. It's good to tape or Velcro cords to the floor if you can't get them out of walkways. There's lots of products on the market for suspending cords under desks or along walls. So winter considerations, I could talk for a half an hour about de-icing, so I won't do that. I'll just say the old line of avoid under-application, but apply judiciously. What in the world does that mean? Applying, of course, before weather strikes helps to be able to use less de-icing chemical. Trying to remember to reapply daily as ice forms because near the downspouts, the snow piles, anywhere that the melt runoff might create problems later on in the day for teachers who are leaving school at the end of the day. We tend to think a lot about them coming in the morning, but when the sun has been out and has been shining all nice during the day, it's melted some things, and then the sun moves to another part of the building, that area freezes, and then the hazards become apparent. So getting some salt and sand in those areas as early as possible helps to use less product, is what I hear. But this is and this EPA.gov safer choice is for if they have a variety of different products, they go through the different calcium chloride and et cetera products that and what they're good for and what they might be harmful for. But it's just important to remember to treat back or side entrances too, anywhere that employees might be sneaking in and out, and treating slanted or ramped areas thoroughly, and considering off-campus areas. One of the school districts we insure it didn't have adequate parking at one of their elementary schools, and so some of their teachers had to park along streets. And so they got permission from even the homeowners in the area to be able to salt and sand their sidewalks so that the teachers could arrive safely to school in the morning. And definitely don't forget some of the dumpster areas. And if you are having your folks go out to an area where it is a little bit more hazardous to take trash and you can't get the melt runoff diverted or salt and sand often enough, adding some extra protection by having them put on ice grippers can be a good idea. But it's important to know that with these ice grippers, the pain with them is that they are not safe indoors. As soon as you step inside with one of these guys on, if you step onto tile or linoleum floor, it's going to be like having an ice skate on, and you're just going to go sliding. And also, some folks I've talked to say they wear them when they drive, they wear them when they operate machinery, but I would caution against providing this to your staff or allowing them to wear it when they're operating company equipment, because these have not been okayed or approved or researched or tested for being safe when driving. There are some things that have been approved for driving, and this GRIPS footwear is one type. It has bands of sandpaper-like aluminum oxide on the bottom that increases traction on snow and ice, and it's also been proven to be safe to be worn inside and when driving or operating machinery. And they have GRIPS Light is available at some of these different sites, and they have those same sandpaper-like strips on the bottom and run about $40 or so. It varies at different sites that you go to, but this is a different type that has low profile carbide studs on the bottom that can be also worn inside and are safe when driving. I couldn't find a price for the Ice Beast because you have to actually go to the winter walking site and request a pricing, so I didn't do that. But these might be good ideas to consider just for those first responders, those people that show up early in the morning or late at night to do all of the snow removal. Having them outfitted well is a good precaution. Providing for the rest of the folks, providing some kind of baggie or lidded container of sand and salt for just the general employees could be a good idea. I think the best, the most effective, or the reason why this can work so well is that it just helps people increase their awareness, because when you're carrying it with you, you're just paying more attention to your walkway, or if you forget and you leave it in your car, you might feel a little guilty, and that guilt just might work a bit to help you to pay a little bit more attention to your walkway, because you think, darn, I should have brought that thing with me. We had a large hospital system that when they had experienced 57 winter slips and falls in a single year, and the frequency decreased to just 3 the next season when they provided some Dixie cups and containers of sand and salt at all the employee entrances. And of course, you can't really do that at school districts. You can't, because the kids might get a little too creative, but just by providing these individual sand shakers to folks, maybe a big bucket of them in the employee break room might be a better idea than at the entrances. A smaller hospital system went from 17 to 2 after using them, so it can be helpful. And I'll send out the info on, we've worked with a vendor for ordering these, a simple way of ordering them so you can get it at a little bit of a discounted price. So we'll send out that information after this too. So our last 3 don't take very long to run through, our last 3 best practices. Number 8 here is just to increase awareness, and RAS has a lot of posters and tip sheets that are out on our portal and available for school districts to download and use for free. You can print out the color copies and use them as posters on employee entrances. We have one on playground considerations, slip, trip, fall prevention on playgrounds for a lot of those playground monitors. Just adding that into, adding a safety minute during staff meetings and running through a tip sheet quick, or sending them out in emails, messages in newsletters, employee newsletters, putting up those posters again. Good for all of us human beings in our culture of busyness. We just need that opportunity to increase our awareness and increase our attention on our pathway and understanding the risks and hazards in the winter and year round, I guess. The 9th best practice for that little group of slip, trip, fall for your slip, trip, fall prevention team is just to oversee some construction projects, work with contractors to determine their prevention plans while they're going to be in your facility. Be involved in the projects as far as minimizing new threshold heights, carefully choose new flooring, consider safety and function as well as appearance. The fun carpeting with all the crayons on it might be really cool for the kindergartners, but if it creates a visual perception issue and a trip hazard, it's not as much of a good idea. And best practice number 10 is to keep some internal records, and this is more of a liability type of benefit, that if you have good internal records showing your cleaning products that you've used, your maintenance procedures, hazard assessment reports, if you have all of those things in place, it really shows due diligence. Again, in that Falls Aren't Funny book, a lot of that book was about decreasing the liability for businesses, and that was a big point that he had made, that just by showing due diligence, the judges will tend to go easy on their when they award the amount of money afterwards. So here is our final list of best practices. And so before we go back to Danielle for the questions, I just want to encourage your district to do a little gap analysis of your current slip, trip, fall prevention practices. Congratulate yourselves on the things you're already doing well and thoroughly, and just look for opportunities for improvement or strengthening within these 10 best practices.
Well, thanks, Lori. That was a lot of great information. We didn't have any questions come in from the group,
okay.
But we value your partnership. We thank you for attending today. If you do have any questions following the presentation, Lori's contact information is on the screen. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to be able to assist. So if you do have any follow-up questions, please reach out to us. We'll also
definitely
be sending some follow-up information like Lori indicated, so look for that coming to you soon, and have a great day.
Yes, and good luck with the slip, trip, fall prevention. Take care.